Abandoned on the battlefield. Zachary screamed as the Khotan blast tore through his insectoid body, his green blood pouring onto the war-torn dirt of planet Saphira. The young alien soldier knew he was dead as his urine squad retreated under heavy fire, leaving him to die alone and abandoned on the chaotic battlefield. His vision blurred, and the sounds of battle grew distant. The pain was excruciating, but the fear of dying alone was worse. Then, through the smoke and chaos, a human silhouette emerged. Sergeant Jake Thompson, an Earth Alliance medic, sprinted through enemy lasers to Zachary's side. The human's calm, skilled hands immediately worked to slow the bleeding and dress the horrific wound. Jake knew that if he failed, the alien would die, and the fragile Jiren-human alliance could shatter. Khotan soldiers closed in fast, their weapons firing relentlessly. Jake faced an impossible choice. He couldn't leave Zachary behind, not after everything they'd been through together. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and crouched down next to the wounded Zephyrin. "This is going to hurt like hell, but I need you to stay with me, okay?" Jake said, locking eyes with Zachary. The alien nodded weakly, his mandibles clicking in pain. Jake hoisted Zachary up and over his shoulders in a fireman's carry, grunting with the effort. Zachary was heavy, his exoskeleton dense and armored, but Jake was strong, and he carried heavier loads before. He took a deep breath and started moving, keeping low to the ground. The battlefield was a maze of craters, burned-out vehicles, and rubble. Jake navigated through it all, relying on his months of experience on Zyria. He knew this terrain like the back of his hand. Laser blasts sizzled overhead as he ducked and weaved, Zachary's blood seeping into his uniform. "Why are you doing this?" Zachary asked, his voice strained and translated through Jake's earpiece. "I am not one of your kind." "Doesn't matter," Jake panted, vaulting over a chunk of concrete. "I'm a medic. My job is to save lives, no matter what planet they're from." Zachary fell silent, contemplating this as Jake pushed onward. The human's strength and determination were unlike anything he'd ever seen. Most Zephyrins would have left him for dead, focusing on their own survival, but not Jake. As they skirted a bombed-out building, Jake spoke again. "You know, back on Earth, I was just a regular guy. Worked in a hospital, patched up people from all walks of life. Rich, poor, young, old. Didn't matter to me. I just wanted to help. And that is why you came to Zyria?" Zachary asked. Jake nodded. "When the Alliance put out the call for medics, I knew I had to step up. Couldn't just sit back and watch while people were dying out here." Zachary marveled at the human's compassion. To risk one's life for complete strangers, for beings so different from oneself, it was a concept that few Zephyrins grasped, but Jake embodied it wholly. Suddenly, a laser blast struck the ground mere inches from Jake's boot. He cursed and dove for cover behind a rusted-out Khotan tank, setting Zachary down gently. "Sniper," he hissed, peeking around the edge of the tank. "Must have spotted us." Another laser shot rang out, barely missing Jake's helmet. He flinched back, mind racing. They were so close to the base, but pinned down. He had to take out that sniper, or they'd never make it. Jake turned to Zachary, pressing a fresh bandage to the alien's wound. "Stay here and keep pressure on this. I'll deal with our friend up there." Zachary grabbed Jake's arm with a clawed hand. "No, you cannot face them alone." Jake grinned, a fierce light in his eyes. "Don't worry about me. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." He patted Zachary's shoulder reassuringly. Then, with a deep breath, sprinted out from behind the tank, drawing the sniper's fire. Lasers scorched the earth at his feet as he zigzagged, searching for the telltale glint of a scope. There, in the third-story window of a ruined building, Jake raised his rifle and fired off a burst, the round sparking against the sniper's position. He dove and rolled, narrowly avoiding the answering shot, his heart pounding in his ears. Jake scrambled for new cover, knowing that he had to close the distance fast. The sniper was good, But Jake had been trained by the best. He drew in a breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against his shoulder, the round sparking off the sniper's helmet. The Kodan jerked back, mandibles flaring in surprise. Jake fired again, and this time, the shot found its mark. The sniper slumped over, rifle clattering to the ground below. Jake wasted no time. He sprinted back to the tank, where Zachary lay waiting, green blood pooling beneath him. The Zephyran's breath came in ragged gasps, his eyes glazed with pain. "I got him," Jake said, kneeling beside his friend. "Now let's get you out of here." He hoisted Zachary up once more, ignoring the burning in his muscles. The Zherin base was close now, just a few hundred meters away. Jake could see the glint of force fields, the flash of friendly weapons. As he staggered through the gates, Zherin soldiers swarmed around him. They took Zachary from his arms, rushing the wounded soldier towards the medical facility. Jake followed close behind, his own fatigue forgotten. Inside the medbay, it was chaos. Zherin doctors and nurses rushed back and forth, tending to dozens of injured soldiers. Jake pushed his way through, Zachary's limp form cradled in his arms. "I need a table now," he shouted. A Zephyrin nurse gestured him over, mandibles clicking rapidly. Jake laid Zachary down gently, then turned to the assembled medical staff. "He's got a laser wound to the abdomen, severe blood loss. I've slowed the bleeding, but he needs surgery, stat." The Zephyrin doctors nodded, their compound eyes gleaming. They moved in, long-fingered hands already working to cut away Zachary's armor. Jake stepped back, letting them do their job, but he didn't go far. He hovered at the edge of the room, watching intently as they worked to save his friend's life. Hours passed. Jake paced the length of the medbay, ignoring the curious glances from passing soldiers. He couldn't rest, couldn't relax, until he knew Zachary was going to be okay. Finally, one of the doctors emerged, green-stained gloves held aloft. "The surgery was successful," he said, mandibles twitching in the Zephyrin equivalent of a smile. "Your friend will live." Jake sagged with relief, a grin splitting his face. "Thank you, Doc. Really." Word of Jake's actions spread like wildfire through the base. Everywhere he went, Zephyrin soldiers stopped to stare, to whisper amongst themselves. They had never seen a human risk so much for one of their own. It was unheard of, unprecedented. In the days that followed, as Zachary recovered, Jake rarely left his side. He sat with his friend, trading stories and jokes, learning more about Zephyrin culture. Zachary was eager to share, to teach Jake the ways of his people. "You have earned great respect among my kind," Zachary said one day, his mandibles clicking softly. "What you did for me will not be forgotten." Jake ducked his head, embarrassed. "I was just doing my job, Zach. Anyone else would have done the same." But Zachary shook his head. "No, Jake, not anyone. You are unique, special. You have a heart unlike any I have encountered." A warm feeling bloomed in Jake's chest. He had come to Zephyra to make a difference, to help in any way he could. To know that he had succeeded, that he had touched the lives of these aliens, meant more than he could express. Their moment of peace was shattered by the blare of alarms. Jake leaped to his feet, hand already reaching for his rifle. He knew those alarms, knew what they meant. "The Kodan," Zachary hissed, struggling to sit up. "They're coming." Jake helped his friend to his feet, mind racing. The Kodan had launched offensives before, but never on this scale. The entire base was mobilizing, soldiers rushing to their posts, weapons at the ready. "Looks like this is it," Jake said grimly. "The final stand." Zachary placed a clawed hand on Jake's shoulder, eyes gleaming with determination. "Then we will face it together, my friend, as brothers in arms." Jake nodded, a fierce grin spreading across his face. No matter what happened, no matter what the Kodan threw at them, he knew one thing for certain. He would fight to his last breath to defend this base, these people. Because they were more than just allies now. They were family. The battle begins. The Khotan forces descended upon the Zhuran base like a swarm of angry hornets, their weapons spitting lasers and plasma with relentless fury. Jake sprinted through the chaos, his medical kit bouncing against his hip as he dodged and weaved between the explosions. All around him, Zephyrin soldiers took up defensive positions, their insectoid faces set with grim determination. Jake skidded to a halt beside a group of Earth Alliance medics who were crouched behind a hastily erected barricade. They looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes, their hands shaking as they clutched their medical supplies. "Listen up," Jake shouted over the din of battle. "We've got wounded out there, and it's our job to get them to safety. Stay low, move fast, and don't stop for anything." "Got it." The medics nodded, their fear giving way to resolve. Jake felt a surge of pride as he watched them fan out across the battlefield, their Red Cross armbands standing out like beacons amidst the smoke and fire. A nearby explosion rocked the ground, sending Jake stumbling. He caught himself against a shattered wall, his ears ringing. Through the haze, he saw a familiar figure charging towards the Khotan lines, a rifle clutched in clawed hands. "Zachary!" Jake shouted, his heart leaping into his throat. The Zephyrin soldier was a blur of motion, his exoskeleton glistening with sweat and grime as he dodged and rolled between the enemy's laser blasts. With a fierce battle cry, Zachary leaped over a barricade and opened fire, his rounds tearing through the Khotan ranks. All around him, Zephyrin soldiers surged forward, their mandibles clicking with rage as they followed Zachary's lead. The Khotans faltered, their advance slowing as they met the ferocious counterattack. Jake watched in awe as Zachary fought, his movements fluid and graceful despite the chaos of battle. The Zephyrin soldier was a force of nature, inspiring his fellow troops with his bravery and skill. But then, a plasma bolt caught Zachary in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the ground. Jake's heart stopped, his breath catching in his throat. "No!" he screamed, sprinting forward. He reached Zachary's side in seconds, his hand already reaching for his medical kit. The Zephyrin soldier lay still, green blood oozing from the wound in his shoulder. "Zach, can you hear me?" Jake asked, his voice tight with fear. Zachary's compound eyes flickered open, his mandibles twitching weakly. "Jake, I don't." "Try to talk," Jake said, ripping open a package of gauze. "I've got you." He worked quickly, his hand steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. He packed the wound with gauze, then wrapped a pressure bandage around Zachary's shoulder, securing it tightly. "Medic," Jake shouted, his voice cracking. "I need a stretcher over here now." 2 Earth Alliance medics appeared at his side, a hovering stretcher between them. Together, they lifted Zachary onto the stretcher, careful not to jostle his injured shoulder. "Get him to the medbay," Jake ordered, his eyes never leaving Zachary's face. "I'll be right behind you." The medics nodded and took off, the stretcher bobbing gently as they navigated the rubble-strewn battlefield. Jake watched them go, his heart pounding in his chest. Around him, the battle raged on, the Khotans pushing forward with renewed vigor. Jake knew that they couldn't hold out much longer, not without reinforcements. The Zhuran base was in danger of being overrun, and with it, the lives of everyone inside. Jake gritted his teeth, his mind racing. He had to do something, had to find a way to turn the tide of the battle. But what could one medic do against an entire army? And then it hit him. A plan so crazy, so desperate, that it just might work. Jake turned and sprinted towards the command center, his boots pounding against the dirt. He had to find the base commander, had to convince her to trust him. Because if his plan succeeded, they just might have a chance to save the base and everyone in it. But if it failed, Jake pushed the thought from his mind. Failure was not an option, not when the lives of his friends, his family, hung in the balance. He would make this work. He had to. For Zachary, for the Zhuran, for everyone who called this base home. The plan. Jake burst into the command center, his eyes blazing with determination. The base commander looked up, her compound eyes widening in surprise. "Sergeant Thompson, what are you doing here?" she demanded. Jake took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "Commander, I have a plan, and I need your help to make it happen." The commander stared at him for a long moment, her mandibles twitching thoughtfully. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I'm listening, Sergeant. What did you have in mind?" Jake grinned, a fierce light burning in his eyes. "We're going to hit the Codons where it hurts, and we're going to do it with the one thing they never expected." The commander's eyes widened, her mandibles clicking with surprise. "A trap? Tell me more." Jake nodded, his mind racing as he outlined his plan. "The Codons are predictable. They always attack in the same formation, with their heavy artillery in the rear and their infantry in the front. If we can lure them into a minefield, we can take out their infantry and force their artillery to advance." He grabbed a nearby datapad and pulled up a map of the base's perimeter. "We'll set up the charges here, here, and here," he said, pointing to strategic locations. "Then we'll send out a small team to engage the Codons and draw them in." The commander studied the map, her mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "It's a risky plan, Sergeant, but it might just work." She looked up at Jake, her eyes narrowing. "Who will lead this team?" Jake squared his shoulders, his jaw set with determination. "I will, Commander. I know the Codon tactics better than anyone, and I won't ask my men to do anything I wouldn't do myself." The commander nodded slowly, respect dawning in her eyes. "Very well, Sergeant. You have my permission to proceed. But be careful out there. We can't afford to lose you." Jake saluted sharply, his heart pounding with anticipation. "Yes, Mom. I'll get it done." He turned to leave, but the commander called after him. "And Sergeant, may the gods watch over you." Jake paused, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Thank you, Commander, but I have a feeling the gods will be watching this battle with great interest." With that, he strode out of the command center, his mind already racing ahead to the challenges that lay before him. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity as Jake and his team set up the minefield. They worked quickly and efficiently, laying the charges with practiced precision. The Zephyrin soldiers watched in amazement as the humans moved with a speed and agility that belied their soft, fleshy bodies. Jake wiped the sweat from his brow as he set the final charge, his muscles aching with fatigue. He straightened up and surveyed their handiwork, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Good work, everyone," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Now comes the hard part." He turned to his team, his eyes blazing with determination. "We need to draw the Codons into the minefield, and that means putting ourselves in the line of fire." The human medics and Zephyrin soldiers exchanged nervous glances, but Jake could see the resolve in their eyes. They knew what was at stake, and they were ready to do whatever it took to protect their base and their comrades. Jake nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "All right, let's move out. And remember, stay low and stay together. We're going to make it through this, no matter what." With that, he shouldered his rifle and led his team out into the war-torn landscape, their boots crunching on the rubble-strewn ground. They didn't have to wait long for the Codons to appear. The insectoid warriors swarmed over the horizon like a plague of locusts, their weapons glinting in the harsh sunlight. Jake and his team opened fire, their rounds sparking off the Codons' thick exoskeletons. The Codons returned fire, their lasers sizzling through the air with deadly accuracy. Jake ducked and weaved, his heart pounding in his chest as he led his team closer to the minefield. The Codons pursued them relentlessly, their mandibles clicking with bloodlust. Just as they reached the edge of the minefield, Jake heard a sharp cry of pain. He whirled around to see one of the Zephyrin soldiers crumple to the ground, green blood oozing from a wound in his chest. Without hesitation, Jake sprinted to the fallen soldier's side, his medic's instincts taking over. He dragged the Zephyrin to cover and quickly assessed the wound, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Hold on, buddy," he murmured, his voice tight with fear. "I've got you." But even as he worked to stem the bleeding, Jake knew that they were running out of time. The Codons were closing in, their lasers cutting through the air with increasing frequency. Jake gritted his teeth, his mind racing. They had to get the Codons into the minefield, but they couldn't do it alone. They needed help, and fast. Suddenly, a fierce battle cry split the air, and Jake looked up to see a familiar figure charging towards them, a rifle clutched in his clawed hands. "Zachary!" Jake shouted, his heart leaping with joy and relief. The Zephyrin soldier reached their position in seconds, his exoskeleton glistening with sweat and grime. "I couldn't let you have all the fun," he said, his mandibles twitching with amusement. Jake grinned, a fierce light burning in his eyes. "Glad to have you back, buddy. Now let's finish this together." Turning the tide, they led the charge towards the minefield, their weapons blazing as they dodged and weaved between the laser blasts. The Codons pursued them, their mandibles clicking with rage and frustration. And then, with a deafening roar, the minefield exploded. The Codons were caught in the blast, their bodies torn apart by the shrapnel and flames. Those that survived the initial explosion were quickly cut down by the Zephyrin forces, who surged forward with renewed vigor. Jake and Zachary fought side by side, their movements perfectly synchronized as they cut a path through the Codon ranks. They were a force to be reckoned with, their friendship and trust in each other giving them a strength that no enemy could match. But even as they fought, Jake could feel his strength waning. His muscles burned with fatigue, and his lungs ached with every breath. He knew that they couldn't keep this up forever, no matter how skilled they were. Just as he was about to give the order to fall back, a plasma bolt caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the ground. Pain exploded through his body, and he gasped for breath, his vision swimming. He could hear Zachary shouting his name, could feel the Zephyrin's clawed hands on his shoulders. "Jake, stay with me, buddy. Don't you dare die on me now." Jake forced his eyes open, a weak grin tugging at his lips. "Wouldn't dream of it," he rasped. "We still have too much work to do." Zachary's mandibles twitched with relief, and he helped Jake to his feet, supporting his weight as they limped towards the safety of the Zephyrin lines. Around them, the battle raged on, but Jake could see that the tide had turned. The Codons were in full retreat, their forces shattered and broken. As they reached the base, a cheer went up from the Zephyrin soldiers. They surged forward, clapping Jake and Zachary on the back and shouting their names with joyous abandon. Jake grinned, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. They had done it. They had saved the base and everyone in it. But even as he basked in the glow of victory, Jake knew that this was only the beginning. There would be other battles to fight, other challenges to face. But with Zachary by his side, he knew that they could overcome anything. Their bond of friendship was unbreakable, a shining example of what could be achieved when two species work together in harmony. And as he looked to the future, Jake felt a sense of hope and determination wash over him. No matter what lay ahead, he knew that he would face it with courage and compassion, just as he always had. Because that was what it meant to be a medic, to be a friend, to be a hero. And Jake would never stop fighting for what he believed in, no matter the cost. The aftermath. The battle was over, but the work had only just begun. The Zephyrin base was a hive of activity, with soldiers and medics tending to the wounded, repairing damaged equipment, and fortifying their defenses. Jake and Zachary moved through the chaos, their bodies aching from the strain of the battle. But their spirits were high, buoyed by their victory and the bond they had forged. As they approached the medbay, Jake spotted a familiar face. Dr. Chen, the Earth Alliance's chief medical officer, was overseeing the treatment of the injured. "Jake, Zachary," she called, waving them over. "I heard about what you did out there. That was incredible." Jake shrugged, a modest smile on his lips. "Just doing our job, Doc." Dr. Chen shook her head, her eyes glinting with admiration. "It was more than that. And you know it. You saved lives today. and you showed the Kodans that we won't back down." Zachary nodded, his mandibles clicking with agreement. Jake is a true warrior. His courage and compassion are unmatched. Jake ducked his head, embarrassed by the praise. "It wasn't just me. We all fought hard, and we all made sacrifices." Dr. Chen placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression softening. "And that's what makes you a hero, Jake. You're not just a fighter. You're a healer and a leader. We're lucky to have you." Jake felt a lump form in his throat, and he swallowed hard. "Thanks, Doc. That means a lot." Dr. Chen smiled, then turned her attention to Zachary. "And you, Zachary, how are you feeling?" Zachary flexed his injured shoulder, wincing slightly. "I will heal, thanks to Jake. He saved my life, more than once." Dr. Chen nodded, her expression thoughtful. "The bond you two share is remarkable. It's a testament to what we can achieve when we work together." Jake and Zachary exchanged a glance, their eyes shining with mutual respect and gratitude. They had been through hell and back, but they had come out stronger for it. As they stood in the medbay, surrounded by the sounds of healing and recovery, Jake felt a sense of peace wash over him. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. But with friends like Zachary by his side, he knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. New beginnings. In the weeks that followed the battle, the Zhuran base began to rebuild. The Earth Alliance and Zephyrin forces worked together, their bond stronger than ever. The victory against the Kodans had given them hope, and they were determined to fight for a better future. Jake and Zachary became symbols of this new alliance, their friendship and inspiration to all who knew them. They continued to work together, tending to the wounded, training new recruits, and strategizing for the battles to come. One evening, as the sun set over the war-torn landscape, Jake and Zachary sat on a hill overlooking the base. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the air filled with the sounds of nature reclaiming the land. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Jake said, his voice filled with wonder. Zachary nodded, his compound eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. "It is, a reminder of what we're fighting for." Jake turned to his friend, his expression serious. "Zach, I want you to know how much your friendship means to me. You've taught me so much about courage, loyalty, and compassion." Zachary placed a clawed hand on Jake's shoulder, his mandibles clicking softly. "And you have taught me the same, Jake. You are more than a friend. You are my brother." Jake felt a surge of emotion, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Zach. We're in this together, no matter what." Zachary nodded, his eyes shining with determination. "Together, we will face whatever comes, and we will win because we fight not just for ourselves, but for each other." As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, Jake and Zachary sat in companionable silence, their bond unbreakable. They knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but they were ready. Together, they would face the challenges of war and the trials of peace, and they would do it with the same courage and compassion that had brought them this far.